We are live tonight with Team Young Earth Creation. We've got Nephilimfree, Jeremy, Landon, and Raw Matt. We're going to have some fun tonight. This is episode 2 of the Creation Hour. Make sure you tune into episode 1 for some real evolution dismantling. You're not going to want to miss that one. We got plenty more episodes to go. A couple announcements. We have this Friday, don't miss it. Raw, Matt, and myself are going to be interviewing Dr. Ken Hovind, the legend himself. So that's going to be a lot of fun. That's going to be at 9 o'clock EST. So we're really looking forward to that, plus some scheduled debates in the future as well. So I'm going to introduce everybody here. Obviously, no one's a stranger. Neph, Jeremy, Landon, Raw, Matt. We're going to start off just reviewing a little bit of the debate last night between myself and Patient Beard on Modern Day Debates channel. Great channel. He puts on some good debates. He's going to put on a lot more good debates, so subscribe to him. We'll start off with, actually, we were talking to Landon, who wanted to give his thoughts on the debate first. Go ahead there, Landon.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Patient Beer's comment. He said that DNA and computers are nothing alike. And he just said he hates it when they're compared. I was just gonna say, like, as we all know, they are alike in a variety of ways. I mean, like the code, information, but I was going to mention that I have some experience with video game development and modding. This is one example of how they're similar. Sometimes features, like when they're making a video game, they get left out, but they're still in the game, like in the file or in the whole program. And those unused game files are essentially unexpressed. But like modders who like can mess with a game and like tinker with it on PC, they can still access those files, and they can likely make it so that they're expressed in the game. So if there's just something that was left out of the game, they can bring it back, and they can make it express itself in the game. I was going to say, this is remarkably similar to unexpressed genes and how scientists can see those unexpressed genes, what they do, etc., even though they're inactive. So these unexpressed genes are very similar to unexpressed game files. I just think it was ridiculous for him to say that DNA and computers are nothing alike. I just think it's very biased and uninformed. So,
nice analogy. I like that.
Very nice analogy. Yeah, that's a perfect response to what he said. And I noticed he really didn't respond to much of what I said. He seemed very much uninformed, and he seemed like he had a very, very simplistic view of the biblical creation model. I mean, I put forth a pretty in-depth model that not only falsifies, his own theory, but at the same time confirms our theory, our model, I should say, and very specific predictions in regards to genome functionality, in regards to the overturning of junk DNA and how that's consistent with a biblical model, as well as genome-wide degradation after the fall. When we read Genesis, take Genesis as literal, what would we assume? Death, decay, degeneration, and that's exactly what we see in our genome in regards to genetic entropy. I gave plenty of evidence for it, so I think it's his simplistic view of a biblical creation model. I think he was expecting something a little bit more simple that he can rebut. So I think that kind of overwhelmed him. Actually, Jeremy, you made a good point about how it comes down to competing hypotheses. It comes down to falsifying that competing hypotheses, kind of like what Darwin did back in the day with the more fixity of species view of young Earth creation. Can you elaborate on that just slightly?
Okay, so this is the review now?
Correct.
Okay. I'm a little busy. What again? The review, sorry. Okay, you, during your debate, standing for truth, to me, looked and sounded like a warrior. Okay, you looked and sounded like a warrior when you took on about 90% of the questions. because the vast majority of questions were for you. You also answered most of them properly, except for one, the Christian evolutionist thing. Your strategy on his opening were also brilliant, and I might say also brave. Your opening strategy statement, because you yourself opened up and engaged evolution's best evidence, not fearing it. So that's a bold move. Also, what you did in the opening was the scientific way. Your opening statement was applying the scientific way without some of those dumb atheists noticing it. By applying the scientific method, because in many cases in science, you try to disprove or falsify the competing model. And that's what you did in the opening statement. So that's very good. So in science, you don't always try to prove your model. You do prove it, but not always. But in most cases in science, you falsify the competing model and the competing model, and that's exactly what you did. So that's incredible. That's what Charles Darwin did during. That's what Charles Darwin did during his time when he falsified the archaic and the weak creationist model during his time. Okay, and your opening put fear into your opponent. When the opponent found out that he cannot refute the evidence, he pivoted. I'm not sure if pivot is the correct English, so correct me if I'm wrong. Not good in English. He pivoted by interrupting an opening statement. How rare do you see that? How rare do you often see that? And he pretended to say something else. That's the ordinary reaction of a person who feels he's cornered. The real debate has not even started yet. I already see him cornered. What a shame. Also, as I recall, there are only 2 to 3 questions directed at your atheist ape opponent. Yet he cannot and did not answer 2 of those. Okay, only 2 to 3 questions directed at him personally. 2 of them coming from me, which I myself asked. He cannot answer. He didn't answer. He just said he can't. He just said he can't. Well, at least we see an honest atheist ape here. Stinking ape. He said a biologist may be able to answer my question, but I have studied the literature for so long, and all I see were non-empirical evidence at all. Non-empirical. All guesses only, with the assumption of evolution already happened or no explanation at all. I gave him an impossible question to answer. But you did answer it, right? Standing for truth.
Yep. I gave my thoughts on it.
Yeah. So I think
he responded to every question. He tried to respond to every single question that was asked of him.
No. What I'm talking about are the questions direct. Standing for truth. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah, because 99% of the questions were directed at me. Only 2 or 3 were directed at Patient Beard, and 2 of the 3, which you asked, which were really, really good and in depth, he claimed to not know the answer, and then I gave my input on those specific questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that will be all. I'm a little busy, so you guys talk ahead.
No problem. Yeah, no, I think
I'll be back later.
Especially here, I've just got a couple slides going on. Like, their best evidence when it comes to, say, pseudogenes or human chromosome fusion 2, that arose through a fusion of 2 ape-like ancestors, and the specific genetic markers, whether it's, the gulo pseudogene, ancient chicken pseudogene, beta globin pseudogene. I dismantled those right off the bat. And the way I dismantled it was through what we know about the genome and how over 80% of it is transcribed into RNA suggesting function. And that dismantling their best evidence, but also proving the biblical creation model, it's a double whammy. We falsify theirs and display the accuracy of ours. You know what I mean?
I like it.
Yeah, well, that's not predicted by evolution. That's the thing. It's predicted by creation, but not by evolution. The evolution will say, well, that's what we would expect if evolution were true, but it's not. That's exactly the opposite of what evolution would predict. Evolution would predict that de novo genes occur all the time. I mean, if evolution were true, de novo genes, that is, genes created from happenstance, chance, associations of molecules on the fly, would happen constantly. It would have to, because creationists have pointed out that if evolution were true, it would require continuous input of new genetic information. This caused evolutionists to go back and look at their evidence, their arguments, and say, well, the creationist is right, therefore, and so when they see a gene produce an RNA that they did not know produced an RNA before, they'll say, oh, look, it's de novo. It just happened. And look, this, and then they go the crazy route and say, well, that happened 50,000 years ago or 250,000. They'll actually tell you when it happened, as though they could possibly know when that gene arose. And their belief that gene arose de novo, which means by sheer chance associations of molecules, and is based strictly on the belief that evolution is true. It's just an assumption. So they'll find a gene that produces an RNA and that they did not know produces RNA before, and they'll say, look, this one was created de novo. Well, how do you know that? They don't know any such thing. This is just one of the tremendous, astonishing examples of how evolutionists apply their beliefs, their assumptions, become somehow twisted immediately into scientific facts. We did not know that this sequence of base pairs in the DNA produces an RNA. So when we observe it, that it does, well, it must have been produced immediately by de novo, just within, a couple of thousand years, chance associations of molecules changed a duplicate, and all of a sudden it's now a new gene that specifies, wow, big problem there, specifies something that's critical or important. That's their de novo idea. So whenever they see an RNA produced by a gene that they did not know produced an RNA, they immediately love to believe that it's produced. This was a de novo gene, that this gene was created by a rapid accumulation of genetic mutation that, bam, all of a sudden creates a gene that produces something functional. And they're not even considering the interdependence, the functionality of it, none of that. They just believe it's de novo created because they didn't observe it before. And that's not scientific way of thinking. That's just saying, because we didn't know it before, therefore it was created de novo. That's not scientific. What are you talking about? What?
And it's funny because, well, for one, I want to point out your really good point about universal common ancestry being based on a false assumption anyways. And then they got to assume junk DNA. So once we actually see for ourselves that the trajectory of discovery actually favors genome-wide functionality, which is predicted, based on our model and now this prediction is being confirmed. They got to shoot themselves in the foot and come up with more rescue devices. And the circular form of, reasoning that they have in regards to this, de novo gene synthesis, they'll say it must be true because orphan genes exist, but then orphan genes exist because of de novo, gene synthesis. But thanks to what we know about modern genomics, we know that this amazing category of genes, these orphan genes, or, what the evolutionists might know them as taxonomically restricted genes, they're unique to each organism. So these genes that are being identified in humans and now linked to functions all over the body, it's better explained under the context of engineered intelligent design and the concept of created kinds under a literal interpretation of Genesis. So all the evidence confirms the biblical based model, and an uninformed evolutionist, which to be honest with you, most of them they're not going to understand anything that we just said. So that's not really our fault. It's not our problem. It's their problem at the end of the day. But our model's solid, just like you said, Neff.
That's right. And orphan genes are a big problem for evolutionists. Evolutionists claim that it's not, but they are. There are incongruencies in their ridiculous phylogenetics. Their belief that genetics provides a reason for believing that one, and you said so rightly in your debate that the creationist account believes in not genus but families as the original created kind or thereabouts. That's the best that baraminology can come up with, and that's probably the truth. Not genus, but family. You were right there. And so, but they believe these de novo genes are orphans, and they're produced by phylogenetics. Provide evidence that phylogenetics is correct. But the evidence from orphan genes, which you just mentioned, is profoundly against evolution theory, because we find these orphan genes, there's thousands of genes in different species of living things claim to be so closely related to each other. And yet they have so many genes that can't be found phylogenetically to be related to each other. It demonstrates, it gives a cause for special creation, not evolution. So right you were in stating that orphan genes. I listened to the debate as much as I could, and you stated correctly that orphan genes were a problem for evolution and not an evidence for it, which is the opposite of truth. That's what the evolutionists will tell you. They'll tell you orphan genes are evidence for evolution, but that's an absolute twisting of the truth. The truth is that orphan genes are an argument against evolution, not for it.
Well, it's funny because these orphan genes, when looked at, are clearly part of, the genomic landscape that would be indicative of each created kind. And I even gave Patient Beard, a very specific prediction in regards to, functionality in the creation model versus, say, non-functionality in the evolutionary model. And I talked a lot about, ENCODE and how they've suggested 80%, more than 80% actually, of the human genome is functional. So if we actually test more and more, say, across families, and we find these functionally unique genes across families, well, that's how we can now identify, what actually is related to what, and identify the created kinds. And all he could shout out during the entire debate was no model was presented, even though I presented the LMN haplogroups, genetic entropy, for example, which takes us back to, well, for one, a point of least genetic entropy, which would be a point of creation and a point where, the biblical patriarchs lived into the hundreds. I mean, that's perfectly consistent with a literal interpretation of Genesis. So all the evidence, what I find amazing about what we know about genetics, and that's why I stick to genetics in debates like that, is the same evidence I'm using completely destroys pond scum to people evolution and confirms biblical creation all at the same time. It's like you can just
Yeah.
Debunk evolution and prove creation all in one.
Yeah, and the evolutionists refuses to accept that. They refuse to believe that an argument against evolution is an evidence for creation. But that is, in fact, the truth. About the orphan genes. Orphan genes challenge common descent. Paul Nelson. Here's an article they state 2013 written by Helen Pilcher. She says, and I quote, when biologists began sequencing genomes, they discovered up to a third of the genes in each species seemed to have no parents or family of any kind. Nevertheless, some of these quote unquote orphan genes are high achievers, but where did they come from? With no obvious ancestry, it was as though these genes appeared out of nowhere, but this couldn't be true. What? You hear that? This couldn't be true. So the evolutionist is immediately excluding the idea that the unique genes in one species or another could have been created by special creation because they had to have had an ancestor if evolution were true, and yet they don't seem to. They're just completely new genes. All these species of living things have these unique genes, thousands and thousands of them. So why is it that that's true? If evolution has produced one kind after another kind after another after another, there should be an ancestral history of genes going back. You see that? So
Mhm.
the evolutionist is asking the question: how is it this possible that so many of the various types of living things in the world have these orphan genes that don't seem to have any ancestry going backwards? Because that's what evolution would demand, right? And they can't explain it. So what they have to come up with is this de novo idea. And that's where they come into this weird
And that's a failed logic. Yeah, exactly.
non-scientific idea that chance associations of molecules rapidly, and I mean it has to be rapidly, creates brand new genes out of nothing after duplications of a gene, then that's transformed into genetic information that constitutes a new gene by subsequent mutation. And this process happens rapidly, really rapidly, to explain away all the supposed de novo genes, which are actually orphans in all of the various species of life. So the evolutionist is therefore stuck with believing that chance associations of molecules produce brand new genes that code for functional things, and it happens really rapidly. But as you pointed out in your debate, Standing for Truth, I listened, and you pointed out rightly that the mutation, the idea that mutation builds genetic information rapidly is absurd. Science does not support this idea of the evolutionists that random genetic mutation rapidly builds new sets of genes to to support the evolution idea that one kind will produce another kind. You pointed that out, and that was exactly important. And when you said that, I was shaking my head like, bam, gotcha, brother, gotcha, because that was spot on. But that's how the evolutionist treats genetic information. They believe that brand new genes are produced simply because they have no ancestor. So they take the idea of an orphan gene because it's a unique gene that's found in this species, but not found in any of the creatures that supposedly are its ancestors. Then they have to believe, you see, they're stuck with believing, then it was produced de novo, I mean, by a duplication acted upon by subsequent mutations that turned it into a brand new gene. Now, the rate at which this process had to have happened in the mind of the evolutionist is astonishingly fast, and way too fast, as you pointed out rightly in your debate. I heard you pointed out, you actually mentioned that, is way too fast for the evolutionist uniformitarian idea about how long life has been on this planet. It does not match. And you said that in your debate, and you did so rightly. And when you did, I was like, thumbs up. That was it.
Well,
May I
it's
say
fine.
something?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Let's make evolution pseudoscience right now. Okay.
Yeah. At this point,
Or,
let's just get on to destroying evolution. I
Orphan.
appreciate everyone's review. Let's just go free for all and just
Well,
destroy everything about evolution. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I think Romat and Landon has not yet reviewed the the video.
Yeah, well, I mean, Landon started it off, but at this point, if you want to go on about, why evolution is pseudoscience, go ahead, Jeremy. Start us off, brother.
The orphan genes only.
Yeah, of
If
course. Yeah.
yeah, because as we know, science is about making testable and falsifiable prediction. So if they know evolution so well, why wasn't orphan genes predicted?
Well, exactly right. And the thing is,
Yeah.
these evolutionists, they'll say that they must have evolved suddenly, as Neff was so brilliantly expounding upon, and rapidly from this non-coding DNA, through de novo gene synthesis. Why? Well, pawns come to people evolution must be true. So where else could they have come from? But a far better explanation for the presence of these orphan genes are better formulated within the context of created kinds and functionally unique DNA differences based on pre-existing heterozygosity. So all in all, evolution is quite easily falsified. There's more than just a competing explanation coming from our side. There's a far more superior explanation coming from our side.
One more thing. So we have given them one black eye, right? One black eye. So let's try to give them another black eye. The first black eye, like I said, was they did not predict it. Now, okay, they did not predict it. That's the first black eye. And the second black eye is the fact that not only did they not predict it, but they also developed rescuing device. And when they developed rescuing device, they essentially made it unfalsifiable. And when you make something unfalsifiable, then that is no longer considered science, because science is about testable and falsifiable predictions. So you keep on creating these rescuing devices, making your theory unfalsifiable, then it is not science anymore.
That's
So
a good point, Jeremy.
do you
That's a
guys,
good point.
excuse me, do you guys see the double black eye?
I see I see a couple black eyes. You're absolutely right.
Two black eyes, as you
Yeah.
can see.
They're hurting.
Perfect, isn't it? So that's all. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead there, Neff. You had
That's
something
a
to
good
say, brother?
point, because you stated something that's very true, Jeremy. That the evolutionists constantly fabricate one excuse or another as to why something must be true, and that's exactly what they do. Evolution is a continuous, endless package of philosophical assumptions, one that supports the other, and whenever there's a problem, they imagine some imaginary fix. And the fix is not supported by science, and then it creates another problem, and then of course they imagine another fix. It's a massive package of assumptions laid upon one upon another that fix the supposedly one below it, and that's exactly what they do. And your idea about phylogeny is correct, because that's exactly what they do with phylogeny. They assume one type of living thing must be related to the other. Any genetic similarity between them must be evidence that they're related. Any genetic dissimilarity between them must be evidence that that the mutation creates genetic similarity. Do you see that? They believe that any genetic dissimilarity between any two kinds of living thing that they believe are immediately related to each other, like the fish becomes the amphibian tetrapod, the genetic similarity between them is evidence they're related, right? But now when they find genetic discontinuities between the fish and the amphibian tetrapod, they'll say, well, that's just evidence that random genetic mutation can create the new genetic information in the amphibian tetrapod that's not present in the fish. You see what I mean? So
Yeah.
their idea is you can't falsify it. In their mind, it can't be falsified because it's always true, no matter what you point out. It's the most ridiculous way to approach science.
Well, it's funny, and you brought us some great points there. And Jeremy gave them 2 black eyes, and you just gave them a punch to the gut. And I'm going to give them, the knockout punch, because just like you said, phylogenetic systematics, these phylogenies, they're based on a false primary assumption that universal common ancestry is true. But for one, if there's no way to build the genome and there's no way to counterbalance the information loss based on, deleterious mutation accumulation, it's nothing, but a circular reasoning based on a false assumption. And these inconsistencies that you're talking about, Neff, the lack of uniqueness of, say, the phylogenetic trees, what do? They explain them away by convergent evolution. And convergent evolution we could talk about probably for 3 hours, but all in all, this convergent evolution rescue device is strong evidence that, this phylogenetic tree doesn't actually represent objective reality. That's and right. Really does falsify universal common descent there, Neff.
That's right. Exactly.
Well, I think they need to specify, like, what, in their words, what would falsify evolution? Because I've always gotten really vague answers that really don't match up with what we're talking about. So I'd like them to actually specify in their mind what would falsify evolution.
Well, it sounds like they've made it unfalsifiable.
Yeah, I don't think you'll get an answer.
I think they could just come up with any number of rescue devices. They'll force fit anything into their science fiction religion. So that's a really, really good point there, Landon, because if you attack them with that, they've made it in a way unfalsifiable.
Well, it's like your debate was steam driven. I had asked him what would falsify, like, the naturalistic view of evolution. He said a Precambrian, a rabbit in the Cambrian, but that's not really what I was asking. I was asking, like, what would falsify, like, neo-Darwinism. I mean, I don't think he understood the question, and you just always get kind of vague answers. I mean, you can't really prove that wrong. Go ahead.
Landon, can I address that for a second?
Landon,
What was it?
We should find what in the Cambrian to falsify. What did he answer?
He said
a human being.
He said a rabbit in the Cambrian.
Oh, so that I'll give one example. But not at the Cambrian, huh? In the dinosaur rock layer, we find specific types of plants, okay, that they say evolved during the dinosaur era, in the dinosaur rock layer, dinosaur era. But we also find that same type of plant. I forgot exactly which plant it is, sorry. But we also find that exact same type of plant hundreds of millions of years before the dinosaur rock layer. So that is the one thing that can falsify evolution. And it's not only that. Even Richard Dawkins, in his book I read a long time ago, he said that we only need one out-of-place fossil to falsify evolution. He said that, and we have tons of out-of-place fossils in their geologic column. So that's it.
Yeah, hundreds. You're right, hundreds.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So here's what they're doing. They're making a straw man argument. So that's like, why isn't there a rabbit in the Cambrian? Well, by their own theory, this is ridiculous. This shows the ridiculousness of such arguments we get. This is the level of intellect we get from the evolutionists. If the evolution were true, should we find a rabbit in the Cambrian? What? Of course not. The Cambrian creatures lived, 500 million plus years ago. Why should we expect to find a rabbit which evolved, 40 million years ago in the Cambrian? So by their own theory, we should not expect to find a rabbit in the Cambrian. But so it's self-refuting. But they think that, well, because the creationist says that all living kinds existed in the beginning together, that we should find them. Now, that's where we find that they refuse to accept the logical explanation of what the Noahic flood would have done. Is it rational to believe that Cambrian creatures, which were lived in low-lying, shallow sea areas right off the coasts of the continents, would have been buried by the flood with a rabbit? And the answer is no. We should not expect creatures that lived in seas that are 10, 20, 50, 100 feet deep to be buried by the flood with a rabbit. We should expect a rabbit to be buried where we find rabbits, 50, 100, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet higher in the fossil record than a Cambrian creature. So the flood model matches where we find creatures in the fossil record, but the evolutionist refuses to acknowledge that the global flood mechanism is able to explain why creatures that are such as the Cambrian buried so lowly in the fossil record, and why T-Rex is buried so high in the fossil record is because, firstly, just to put it in a nutshell, we don't expect T-Rex to be walking off the shores of the ocean, right? Okay. So, I mean, duh, free Mike.
May I add something? One more thing about the Cambrian or the lower rock layers, trilobites, for example. We have now discovered that their eyes are so complex, more complex than the eyes of other creatures above where the trilobite layer is. So things are supposed to go simple to complex, but this trilobite eye is already massively complex right from the beginning, and so are all the Cambrian fossils. That's
Yeah,
all.
it's amazing.
And there are a lot more examples. Trilobite eye is just one. A lot more. I can go on forever.
Well, exactly right. If they look to fossils in general as, evidence for, their pet theory, all it is just circumstantial evidence requiring, an actual mechanism to, for one, build the genome into account for all the information that we see. And since we know, natural selection acting upon random variation, random mutations is not going to do the job, since mutations are not construction, they're destruction. At the end of the day, even that is based on a false assumption too, as Neff was explaining earlier. Matt,
Yes,
how about you, brother? You got some input there, Matt?
Oh, for sure. Oh my gosh, I don't even really know where to start. But I mean, how about we talk about that Cretaceous layer, right? I mean, we found all kinds of things in there, not just like plants. How about we found flamingos? We found modern day loons and sandpipers and parrots. We found penguins and albatross and ducks. We found avocets. We found a lot of common era animals. Now, unfortunately, I've been reading chats, so I will post these things right now. So people say, just making comments. Nah, that's all right. Here we go. There we go. Make them happy.
Well, I think that if you were to go there when they were digging the fossils, there's probably so many fossils that are out of place that they find, but they're just really not reported. I mean, that's probably, I would assume that's what happens, because I think I know what
that's a good point. That's a good point.
Romat, you mentioned Cretaceous rock, correct?
I'm sorry, what? Yeah, Cretaceous. That's Cretaceous layer, dinosaur.
Yeah, there's one more thing about the Cretaceous rock layer. It is actually the only clear rock layer that stretches all continents. They contain marine fossils.
There you go.
Since this, correct?
Well,
Yeah.
So I would suggest
Yes,
that
so-
you investigate a video series by Dr. Carl Werner, who is a creationist physician and an emergency room physician who got interested in the creation evolution controversy and did a study of his own. And what he did was He traveled the world with his wife. Apparently, he was a very successful physician, and he traveled the world with his wife and investigated dinosaur dig sites all around the world. And guess what he found? He asked the paleontologists in charge of those dig sites, "Have you found any evidence of fossils, creatures that you haven't expected to find in these dinosaur digs?" And guess what they found in these? They told him directly, uh, just as Raw pointed out, cormorants, owls, egrets, parrots, flamingos, all manner of modern birds and bees and many other creatures found in dinosaur digs all around the world. Now, that doesn't match the evolution theory. Those creatures, according to the story the evolutionists have been feeding us for 100 years or more, is that these birds, modern birds like cormorants, owls, egrets, parrots, and flamingos, and others, ducks, all evolved many millions of years later after dinosaurs. In fact, about roughly 40 million years ago. If you had asked an evolutionist scientist, when did an egret or an owl or a flamingo evolve, they would have told you 40 in 1975 or 85 or 90, they would have told you about 40 million years ago, which is 25 million years after dinosaurs evolved. But guess what? They're found in the dinosaur digs with dinosaurs in the same strata,
Exactly.
25 meters away, 40 meters away, 100 meters away. In the same strata, they find an egret or an owl or a cormorant or a parrot, right? That destroys their evolution theory. Now, the interesting thing is that when Dr. Werner went to the museums of natural history around the world, and the prominent ones, the most prominent ones, he went to those and asked those in charge, the paleontologists who were curators of those museums, "May I examine the fossil remains that you have in your drawers?" And because he was a professional, because he's an actual emergency room physician with like 25 years experience in the medical field, and a PA, they said, "Okay, yeah, I guess so. You're not a layman, you're a professional. I guess we could allow you to do so." And they did. And he went to these numerous drawers in the in museums of natural history all over Europe and in North America. And guess what he found? He pulls out the drawers, he examines the bones they're in, and guess what he finds? All 432 species of modern mammals, including beavers and bears and other animals that coexisted with dinosaurs in the fossil record. These were bones pulled out of of dinosaur digs that belonged to beavers and weasels and parrots and egrets and everything. All these creatures that the evolutionists would have told you in 1980 could not have lived when dinosaurs, but that the evolutionists have been all this time digging them up with dinosaurs and putting them in the drawers, the fossil examples, and hiding them away from the and never telling the general public, "We have found proof that beavers lived with T-Rex." But that's the fact, because he has found the bones of a beaver. Look, this is a beaver bone. It's a beaver skull, and it exists. It was dug up in this strata. That strata was 40 meters away from T-Rex that was dug up in 1979. You see what I'm saying? And proving that all these creatures coexisted together. And that's a powerful evidence of the genetic account in the Bible. But the thing is, the evolutionists will not tell you about that. They will not tell you that thousands upon thousands of fossils have been found in the same strata with creatures that they have been telling you for decades could not have existed at the same time, but fossil record proves they did. And they're still telling kids in school that this creature, like a bird like a parrot or a cormorant or an egret, an owl or an eagle or a flamingo, did not evolve until 40 million years after the dinosaurs went extinct. But the fossil record shows they've been digging them up all the time in the same strata with the fossils of dinosaurs and not telling the public. Now, isn't that a problem for you? I find that to be an incredible problem. That is scientific dishonesty that has no excuse whatsoever.
It's actually worse for evolutionists because we not only found animals living today with dinosaurs in the rock in the dinosaur layer, but we also found plants. Plants.
Right.
Actually,
Yeah.
actually, we also found plants from every plant division
That's
that we see
correct.
today.
Yep.
And this perfectly fits with what I've been explaining in the previous video about catastrophic plate tectonics, where animals who live with humans on higher elevations, those same animals, some of them could have also lived on some parts of the lower elevations where dinosaurs are. So there would be mix-ups. So it makes perfect sense given our catastrophic plate tectonics model also. That's it.
Well, the fact, yeah, just like you said, he found all the major plant divisions, I think was the words that you used, and all of the major animal groups that are actually living today. And these are all fossilized with the dinosaurs, as Neff was talking about. And obviously that was a huge surprise to Dr. Carl Werner. And the thing is, would you expect these natural history museums, to actually, reveal these critical fossils to the public? But we know that all these facts certainly put their, pet theory in jeopardy, which is a huge problem.
Who wants to lose their job, right?
Absolutely.
And those living fossils are so clear. If evolutionists are going to say, oh, that's from a creationist source, well, go check living fossils for yourself and compare them to modern animals today, especially the nautilus. Try that, and so on. There are hundreds of them.
All good points. Let me point out a couple of things that in the debate that our friend Standing for Truth discussed. His opponent said, "You're not a genetic clone of your mother and father." And this was his argument for evolution. So we hear this from evolutionists a lot. Do you remember that he said that, Standing? You remember that? He said, you're not a genetic clone from your mother or father. So evolutionists are expressing their faith that the slight variations from one human being to another is evidence that macroevolution is true. But when they do that, they're ignoring a mountain of things that would have to take place for that to be so and support evolution. So this is just kind of a cover story. He also said, you could get a dog as big as an elephant if you were selectively breeding. It's possible because animals can get that big. Yeah. You're talking hundreds of thousands of generations. That's exactly, I typed out exactly what he said. I'll read it again. He said in the debate with our friend Standing, he said, you could get a dog as big as an elephant if you were selective breeding, quote unquote. And he said, it's possible because animals get that big. So here we got this, it can happen because, well, there it is. Just like, how do you know the camel evolved? Well, there it is. That's why we know. Well, I mean, how do you know it evolved? Well, there it is. See, this is the evolutionist way of thinking. And they're pointing out that they think that a dog, the genetic information in a dog is capable of producing a dog as big as an elephant, is what he's saying. Are you kidding me that there is no genetic barriers?
Well, and that's the thing. They can't. I always ask that question because I mean, some of them are kind of honest, or maybe they accidentally slip into admitting that there are limits. Whether physical, genomic. But the fact that he would admit that yeah, I think I believe through enough artificial selection, you're going to get a dog, say, as big as an elephant. Really displays, well, for one, their great zeal for their science fiction religion, but also their great faith. Because
Can I
none
add
of this
something
is
real quick?
observable.
Can I add something real quick?
Of course, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say that I remember seeing this on TV at one time. They were talking about how when they were breeding these dogs, they kept trying to breed them smaller and smaller, and they started getting health problems the smaller they got because they aren't meant to be that
That's right.
small.
That's right.
And I mean, there's a barrier.
And the large ones too. It's been proven, but vets have written numerous papers in the veterinary journals on this. The large, really big breeds like Saint Bernards and Great Danes, as well as the really small breeds like Boston Terriers, Chihuahuas, right? The biggest and the smallest that man is able to create by selective breeding have heart problems, liver problems, kidney problems. They've got tremendous problems. So when we tinker with their genetics by selective breeding, try to make them bigger or try to make them smaller than what they naturally want to express, right? Then we're tinkering with what God created, and the creature ends up with diseases. Some really small dogs and really big dogs have health problems that are just they're standard for those breeds. So it looks like when the organism reproduces naturally, they produce the best that they can possibly express in considering the environmental conditions that they live in. Now, before the flood of Noah, did you know that they have fossils of dogs? And I'm not kidding you. There is a fossil of a dog that's been discovered that is as big as a grizzly bear. And I'm not lying to you. There is a dog fossil that's been discovered that if that dog were fleshed out, it would weigh at least 700 or 800 pounds.
Oh yeah,
with a skull that is 2.5 feet long, big like a grizzly bear, a massive dog. That's how big dogs were before the flood. But now, because of the flood has dramatically changed the environment of the earth, they're far, far smaller. Now, when man selectively breeds them and tries to tinker with the natural expression of their genes, we get dogs that are diseased, as our friend Jeremy was pointing out. They get big ones when you try to make them big or you try to make them really small. You end up with animals that have kidney problems, heart problems. You leave them alone, they're healthier. Right? When you try to force them to be big or small, that's when you screw them up. That's because you're tinkering with the design.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, me and Matt were pointing out, I can't remember what stream it was, but yeah, everything was bigger. I mean, these massive dogs you talk about, these massive kangaroos we see, massive sharks, whether it's a megalodon, like everything was bigger and more superior. And just like you said, this was pre-flood based on environmental conditions, but also based on genetic entropy, the accumulation of deleterious mutations. Everything's degrading.
Changes to the Earth's atmosphere caused by the flood of Noah reduced the atmospheric pressure and that oxygen content of the atmosphere, causing everything to squeeze down. Life responded to this dramatic change to the environment and got smaller, weaker, and dumber. Noah was probably 8 to 12 feet tall, and I mean there are in the fossil record there are centipedes that are 7 feet long. I mean,
cockroaches huge. Dragonflies with how many foot, wingspans? 2.5 foot wingspans. The size of a patasaurus. The size of these dinosaurs. I mean, this is all consistent with a biblical-based model where we believe in a pre-flood world, where everything was bigger and better. Look at a wolf to a chihuahua. I mean, that's the degradation of information. It's all downhill is what we see. but the evolutionist wants to have it all, right? Lose everything and gain it all.
Well, isn't that the opposite of what evolutionists claim? They think it's an upward process, right? Random genetic mutation builds, designs new genes that code for new things, and it's all upward. And when you point this out, the evolutionist screams bloody murder. They'll say, no, evolution isn't an onward process, it's just natural selection. But wait a minute, from a bacteria to a dog, that's not upward evolution? Give me a break. Come on, shut up already. You know what I mean?
You're going to start as a single-celled organism to a multi-celled organism to a fish to an amphibian, reptile, mammal, bird, monkey, man. I mean, that's going to require massive amounts of new novel information. And they believe, you know, mutations and natural selection are actually going to be able to account for, you know, all these new body plans, structures, innovations. It's not going to happen. Neo-Darwinism lacks incredible explanatory power, just like you said, Neff.
Exactly.
And you had some pictures in the book of all these massive creatures that we were talking about in the past as well. And you even mentioned a few. I'm not sure if it was the dog or what it was that could be close enough to the original created kind. At least, can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, the dire wolf. If you look at what they do with dogs, they've been breeding them for special fixation. If they need a dog to pull a sled, they're going to create one to do that specific thing. If they want a dog to be in a woman's purse and that's what they're going to pay for, they're going to try to create just that. But nobody has ever created anything better than the original at any time ever. So we know that even with plants, they hybridize, they genetically modify them, and sure, they might be able to live specifically in a region that's colder better, but when it comes to health-wise, they've never found anything better than heirloom. The same thing goes with animals. You're not going to create a better wolf, no matter how much you hybridize these dogs and convert them and try to change them. These dogs run flat out from birth as fast as they can go before they can even see. They'll dead stop right in front of a tree. They're incredible animals. So this is another one, you know, that's how I see it. And yeah, you can look back at these original animals, and they're very big and very superior every time.
Absolutely. I mean, there were sloths on the earth that weighed 2,500 pounds. Dragonflies with a wingspan of 2.5 feet. Dogs the size of a 800-pound grizzly bear. Camels that were twice the size of a modern camel. Camels with a back 8 to 9 feet tall. That's with their back. That's twice the size of a normal camel. And kangaroos 6 feet tall. The typical kangaroo today is 3 to 4.5 feet tall. There were kangaroos 6 or 7 feet tall in the fossil record. I mean, everything was bigger, stronger.
Yeah, grasshoppers 2 feet tall. Could you imagine a 2-foot grasshopper coming at you? I mean, flight takes an enormous amount of energy and much more needed oxygen. I mean, this is all just evidence of the pre-flood world that we know to be true based on Genesis. I mean, it's got to be willful ignorance to just deny everything that you can clearly see with your own eyes. I think
there has to be a mechanism that explains this.
Mm-hmm.
Why even the secular camp acknowledges that so many species were massive in the past. So why is that possible? Well, their worldview just can't explain it. But the genetic, as you mentioned, the flood of Noah changing the Earth's environment is a mechanism that can explain it. But the secular camp has no explanation for it. Why would creatures, if evolution were true, continuously, so many of the various families of living things suddenly seem to get massively smaller, when natural selection should have us believe that the biggest, strongest varieties would be preserved by natural selection?
That's a good
It's
point.
the opposite of the opposite of their theory.
Well, these 80-foot apatosaurs that I was talking about, you know, they had the same nostril sizes as a horse. And if we had an animal, say a dinosaur specifically, like the apatosaurus that was living today, they wouldn't be able to survive based on, you know, the current oxygen pressure. So obviously the environment was different and the genetics was different, which once again all just goes right back to a biblical based model. I mean, it's all consistent, I think, is the big point to take from this.
It does. Check out this link I'm showing you. Fossils as big as fossils of rats as big as dogs found in Southeast Asia. Look at the size of the difference in the fossils they found. In his left hand, he's showing you the fossil of a modern rat. And then he's got he's got the jawbone of a fossil rat in his right hand, and look at the tremendous size difference. Rats obviously were massively larger in the past than they are today. And the list of these kinds of things just goes on and on and on and on.
It's crazy. Like if you just doubled the air pressure and increased the oxygen, you know, our plasma would be oxygen saturated, and this increased oxygen pressure would then assist with healing. It's kind of like what me and Matt talked about before, you know, a hyperbaric oxygen chamber, which they even use and has been shown to help with like strokes, MS, autism, things like this. So even football teams use these hyperbaric oxygen chambers. Actually, Matt, weren't you talking about either building or getting your own hyperbaric oxygen chamber?
Oh yeah, of course. I created most of it actually, but I have a machine next to me now for that. But its size is quite a problem with those things. But yeah, they're wonderful. You just have to know what you're doing. You know, people can hurt themselves for being in too long or turning up the pressure. You see when an athlete or when they have a problem, they get in these hyperbaric oxygen chambers and they turn it up to 100%. And that's quite a lot. We're actually trying to double atmospheric pressure and oxygen content, which is only around, you know, much lower than they would actually step foot in one of those machines. They actually can cause a problem being in too long, but for a short time, it's actually still very good for them.
Well, could you imagine if the entire atmosphere was like a hyperbaric oxygen chamber? You know what I mean? Like this, this oxygen that would have been oxygen saturated. I mean, and I think they've even seen this with in amber that the oxygen content was much more significant. So just this doubled air pressure, 50% more O2. I mean, that combined with what we know about genetics perfectly explains what we see in the fossil record, and yet it seems so contradictory to what the evolutionists would have you believe. Plus, you see stasis, you see animals like the horseshoe crab, which looks exactly the same in the fossil record millions and millions of years ago that it does today. And yet what we know about genetic mutation accumulation, that's impossible. These deep time lineages are literally impossible. So once again, that's consistent with a biblical view of history.
Yeah, and plus, I mean, we don't even have to go on the field of biology because many different things actually deal with the concept of evolution that's not biological. I mean, I think that it's getting all bad for these guys because think about it. The quantum physicists found that they've falsified materialism, which is the main philosophy behind the atheism. And then neurologists basically found the rosehip neuron. That was pretty devastating. And then linguists found that language can't arise on its own. Then biologists discovered epigenetics. That threw a damper on beneficial mutations, you know, and then mitochondrial DNA with fast clocks ticking inside of them. And I mean, they even said, what was that famous evolutionist, Karl Popper? He said that if humans don't match genetically more primates than other species, then common ancestry is falsified. Well, guess what? We have more similarity to house cats at 90%. We have dogs at 95%. We share 85% with pigs and mice with 99%. So it's gone. They lost it, you know.
Yes, good point. Their ideas just don't match real science. It's just not science. Here's something that I would share with you. Speaking megafauna, right here is the auroch. In the Encyclopedia Britannica, the 1968 200th anniversary edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, considered one of the world's foremost encyclopedias. It is a collector's item. Now it's worth thousands if you can get your hands on one. My family actually had one. Said that the last of the auroch was shot to death by Poles in the forest in Poland in about the year, I think, 1522. Right? It was the last of its kind. It was the auroch. Now, the auroch is nothing but a gigantic ox. Okay. And it had a shoulder height of about 8 feet. Can you imagine an ox? The shoulder of it is 8 feet high. So according to the 1968 200th anniversary edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, the last of this creature was shot to death in a forest in Poland, and it had a 8-foot shoulder height, and it's an ox. So in other words, that's how big oxen were in the past, 8 feet high, at least 8 feet. How high is the shoulder height of a modern ox? Well, what, 4 to 5 feet, maybe, right? This was 8 feet tall, right? Amazing. And then there's, look at this, this is, they call it camelops, right? They call it camelops. Evolutionists love to rename it. If it's the same creature, but it's just bigger, they give it a different name and call it a different species. That's their game, right? But it's a camel, that's all. But they call it camelops. It can't be a real camel. It's a camelops. See? And how big were they? Massive. Massive. Twice the size of a normal camel. But they're going to call it a camelops.
Yeah, they got to give it an entirely
Right.
different name.
Exactly. It can't be a camel. It's a camelops. Right.
It's like these. Yeah, I'm gonna screen share something as well that they would, of course, have to rename. Like look at the size of this, megalodon's jaw. Look at the size of its mouth versus a great white shark, which we know today as something terrifying. One of the beasts of the ocean. Imagine that megalodon swimming around. And this is just a massive shark. You got the huge camel as you just presented, buffalo horns that are found to be 12 foot long, the horn span that is, these beaver fossils 8 feet long, the trees massive, the centipedes, the cockroaches. I mean, just like this pre-flood world, everything we see in the fossil record is testifies to the pre-flood world. Everything's bigger, everything's better. I mean, it's all there for anybody to see.
There's also the I was going to add the glyptodont, which is basically a giant armadillo. I mean, they know that they live with humans, and I mean, it's just amazing. Like it says they're in the same kind as like the modern 9-banded armadillo, pink fairy armadillo. I mean, it just goes to show just how huge some things were in the past. I mean, they were like the size of cars almost. And that's just one example.
Well, exactly right. I mean, you look at the atmosphere, you look at what we know about genetics, mutation, accumulation. I mean, everything is perfectly explained if you start with the Bible. If you believe the Bible, you start with the Bible. Dinosaurs make sense. The fossil record makes sense. The long lives as recorded in the Bible makes sense. And we would expect after the fall that there would be a decline, just like we see. We would expect a decline in age, and we would expect a decline genetically based on the fall, death, decay. I mean, this is a significant part of our model. It's an aspect. It makes predictions, retrodictions. So for anybody to say that, you don't have a model or no model exists for biblical creation, I mean, they're just willfully ignorant, as 2 Peter 3 would tell us. They're scoffers, willingly ignorant of 3 things: the creation, the flood, and the coming judgment. So it all fits like a glove. Go ahead, Landon.
And I was just going to say, I mean, everything we're talking about is observable. I mean, we're not just making up stuff. I mean, you can observe what we're talking about, like the decay, the limits and variability. I mean, it's all there. I mean, you can easily observe that. I mean, it's not. Go ahead.
Sorry. Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah. Since dinosaur was mentioned again, just two things came to mind. Is my audio doing well? My internet is having some slowdown.
No, you're doing good, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. Two things about dinosaur just pop into my mind. Do you guys know that we found a bird fossil inside a dinosaur, eaten by a dinosaur? Anybody heard of that?
Yeah, I have.
That's good. Do you remember the details, Landon?
I'm trying to remember. It was like some kind of like small carnivorous dinosaur. I think they had eaten birds that they resembled modern birds. I'm not sure
Yes.
what the exact
So
details were, but
yeah, and evolutionists have developed rescuing device for that. So, but the main point here is how could the dinosaurs evolve into birds when we find them eating birds, right? And we'll get to into detail on that next time on the next video. And also, I don't know if you guys notice in the evolutionary literature, um, there is also a huge lack of ecosystem. Okay, there is also a huge lack of ecosystem or vegetation in the dinosaur rock layers. Do you know these, guys?
oh yeah,
Good. So if dinosaurs live in one area and died in that area, its ecosystem should also be found fossilized, correct, along with dinosaurs. But we do not find, in most cases, in the dinosaur rock layer, dinosaurs that are buried with their ecosystems. So it means the dinosaur rock layers were transported by flood-carrying sediments, leaving behind its ecosystems. So dinosaurs were dragged to different locations. So this is another. This is just a little proof of the flood, but there are just so many little proofs of the flood. So that's it for now.
Well, I mean, it's not only proof for the flood, based on the fossils that we see. I noticed the screen wasn't sharing earlier for the audience, so it's sharing now. It's at the megalodon. The size of its jaw, its mouth versus something like a great white shark, for example. But not only that, testifies to the biblical recording of in Genesis of a pre-flood world, but even what we see in the vast majority of fossils anyways, because all of this is just a small percentage of what exists in the fossil record from because the vast majority from top to bottom would be marine fossils. It's 98% of the fossil record is marine fossils, and they're mixed with land fossils. We find clams mixed with birds by the gazillions, mixed with horses in all different strata. So the fact that this vast majority of fossils is marine testifies to the global flood. And it's nice looking at this, small percentage of fossils, but it's all evidence of what the Bible records as a biblical flood.
Standing for truth. Do you know the alternative explanation of evolution is why there are marine fossils in every rock layer in the geologic column?
Did you?
I know. Yeah, I know the answer, but I just want to ask you.
Yeah. Did you want to present the alternative explanation to the audience?
Are we gonna do that now? I'm just asking you.
Are you well, I know last time we talked about the catastrophic plate tectonics model, and Crispr and Crispr had a few objections to it. So for anybody listening, go watch episode 1 of the Creation Hour. We give a lot of significant evidence, for example, from genetics, just disproving universal common ancestry, whether it's the waiting time problem, genomic degradation, information loss. But we also spent some time talking about CPT, which is the catastrophic plate tectonics we talked about flood geology. So we're gonna go over a few things here, a few objections that we came across in regards to that portion of the episode. So we're gonna title it part 2 of that, and I'm gonna hand it over to Jeremy to go over a few of those things. Thanks, Jeremy.
So you want me to address the rising and falling, their alternative explanation of the marine fossils on all rock layers, and
Yes, and
so
and
so
then and then the
both.
comment that we went over in the
Yeah.
with CRISPR. Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Well,
The floor
I
is
almost
yours.
forgot most of what he said because it's too weak that I forgot. But I remember two, which we both discussed. Okay, and also since we have time constraints, I think I'll rebut only two of his points, and he didn't really brought up a lot. So weak, really. So so his expertise is not even in geology. Then he pretends to know that he knows. Sorry, his name is no longer Crispr, right? It's Christine. Yeah, he doesn't.
You're right.
He doesn't deserve the name. Crispr is a beautiful genetics name, and I think he's ugly, so so he doesn't deserve that name. So I'll name him Christine instead. Anyway, okay, let's rebut two of his points. The one he made a big deal of. He said the pterosaur. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pterosaur. Because I have a Chinese and Tagalog accent, so I don't know if you guys are understanding my English very well. On the pterosaur, he cited where he's what did he say again? He said that why are these creatures only buried in the dinosaur rock layer and not at the top layer on the human layer, since they can fly? So he is basically saying, what aren't there any Pterosaurus flying during the flood? It seems strange that not a single Pterosaur was flying during the flood. Wow, it's really so easy and so dumb of an argument. There are several explanations for this. I don't even need to check any creationist source. It's common sense. And I even created several rebuttals to this on my own a few years ago. This is not a new argument. Okay, sorry. There are a few, several explanations for this. Okay, due to the catastrophic plate tectonics and the intense storm happening during the flood, some of the flying pterosaur would have crash landed during the flood. Okay, they cannot fly, they cannot stabilize themselves during the intense storm, during the flood. So some of them would have crash landed during the flood.
All of them.
Right?
And also, I wanted to add that, I mean, even if they died after the flood, when the earth was flooded, I mean, their bodies probably wouldn't fossilize. So, I mean, you wouldn't expect to see them in higher layers of rock.
That's right. Every bird
Yeah,
that lived on the earth, except those on the ark, perished in the flood because the earth was covered. They had nowhere to land except on the sea, and they died. So they flew until they couldn't fly anymore. They fell into the sea, and because they're not birds that are able to swim and live forever, they died. And the flood was a year long. Now, even a creature like a duck, which can swim on the ocean surface, what's it going to die? What's it going to do? What's it going to eat? Well, the flood was a year long, so ducks swimming around on the ocean surface during the flood, riding out the massive tsunamis and everything that was going on, well, they died too, because guess what? They had nothing to eat for a year. So they died too. That's right. Every bird on the earth, except those on the ark, died.
so
It's obvious.
also, we have several explanations. I think you gave another one. I have 7 to 8 explanations for this, which I collected in many years. Here's another one, more obvious one. Also, instead of those pterosaurs flying around during the intense storm, they would logically not fly, correct, and go back to their homes to seek shelter on land. And where do they live, right? and when they seek shelter, their shelter are obviously in the dinosaur, in the close, not exactly at the at those giant dinosaurs, in the places of those giant dinosaurs. But it's almost this. It's almost the same ecosystem as dinosaur, where the homes are. So so they won't be flying around during intense storm, risking their lives. So they just went back home into their ecosystem on land. See, it's too easy. In short, logically, do we allow airplanes to fly during bad weather? No, right? Do we? It's suicidal, correct? We do not allow our planes to fly during bad weather. No. Just like pterosaurs won't decide to fly during bad storm, during flood. And when
Well,
they don't fly, excuse me, and when they don't fly and stay at their homes, they'll get buried by tsunami carrying sediments, just like the other dinosaur on the same layer.
well,
Christine,
an interesting thing is that Native American tribes record that they witnessed the phoenix bird. This is their symbol of God that came and visited them during thunderstorms and lightning storms. And I think the creationist explanation for this is that these birds lived on mountains because they were high flying creatures. They lighted and nested in high altitude areas, like in the sides of mountains and near the tops of mountains. And so when a thunderstorm arose, it scared them and they left. So they would come flying into the lower lying areas to avoid the thunder and lightning, and the people would be down there and they would see them. So they would happen to see these pterosaurs when thunderstorms came, and they associated the pterosaurs with the thunderstorms, and they called them birds of thunder, thunderbirds, and the phoenix. And that's the legend of the phoenix birds, according to the Native American tribes, that they always seem to arrive when, according to their legends, if you poll the various tribes of mankind across the Native American landscape, you'll find that they associate these birds with thunder and lightning. And so it can be explained from a creationist point of view that the geological activity within the first 1,000 or 1,500 years after the flood was still outrageously active. And it's slowing since then because the flood came to an end, right? So these processes are slowing. The thunderstorms, the volcanic eruptions, and earthquakes are reducing in number. Have reduced, let's say, in number over the last, let's say, 1,500 years after the flood. They slowly reduced. So the Native Americans would normally see these creatures during thunderstorms, and that could be explained by the fact that when the thunderstorms and lightning arose, the birds, these I call them birds, they're not actually birds, but these pterosaurs left their nests in the mountains to get away from the lightning, and that's why when the lightning came, the Native Americans saw the pterosaurs because they saw the lightning and they saw the pterosaurs at the same time, and the pterosaurs were simply fleeing the lightning. That's, I think, a very plausible explanation as to why the Native American tribes associate lightning with the phoenix birds, or the great birds that they saw. They call them birds flying in the sky.
Nef, I need to make a correction to what you said, if you don't mind. There were no mountains before the flood.
No, I'm talking about
that's-
events that took place after the flood. You know.
So I thought you said the pterosaurs went to the mountains. So you didn't. Sorry, my mistake.
Pterosaurs lived on the earth after the flood because they got off the ark, and so
Yes. So I thought you were referring to pterosaurs before the flood. So sorry about that. And okay, another one that Christine or Crispr mentioned. Gosh, forgot. Yeah. Okay. He said another one regarding smaller dinosaurs. He said that since, as we know, there are bigger dinosaurs and smaller dinosaurs, right? Another weak rebuttal, really. So dumb. I got four response for this. I'll just give one or two. He said that since there are smaller dinosaurs too, why are they buried with dinosaurs? Because I said in the previous catastrophic plate tectonics video that we made, that bigger creatures live in different areas compared to smaller creatures. I said that, right? Okay, so it looks like I contradicted myself. Okay, this is an argument from ignorance from Christine. Okay, not even reading our material then concluding. Wow, that's really very very religious of him. Okay, very atheistic of him. Close-mindedness. Thank you for showing bias, Christine. Okay, the explanation is once again easy and simple. Those smaller dinosaurs would have lived, okay? Those smaller dinosaurs would have lived on a different ecosystem apart from larger dinosaurs too. They may be close together, but not too close, okay? But since we see them buried together, okay, it means the land level or elevation between the smaller and bigger dinosaurs were at the same level but at different locations. Stupid. Take note, at the same elevation but different locations. So obviously they will be buried together still because they are on the same elevation. Think, dumbass. And he really made a big deal out of the order of the fossils, did he not? Standing for truth.
Yeah, he did. It sounded like he had a big issue with
Yeah.
you know, burial by ecosystems, habitats.
My goodness, that was our first video, right? That was only the first video. I said I only how long did I explain CPT over there? I think it was only 30 to 40 minutes. That's only the basics. Yet he judged the basics immediately. Very atheistic of him, very close-minded. Thank you for showing your bias, Christine. Anyway.
Standing during your debate with that fellow, one thing that he pointed out that is his argument against the creation model, and we hear this a lot, was bad design. Remember that? He mentioned bad design. Oh, this is bad design. That's bad design. I wonder if you'd elaborate for us a little bit about this ridiculous evolutionist argument that it's all, if it was designed, it's bad design. Because we hear this a lot. And I think this is one of the evolutionist arguments that layperson evolutionists love to repeat because they've heard it so much and they think it's a strong argument of some kind. But could you tell us a little bit why you think this argument for bad design is a bad argument?
Well, I think a lot of that too comes down to the fact that evolutionists have made so many bad predictions in the past. Even if you look to, you know, what I call the myth of junk DNA, vestigial organs, you know, we all know that these things have been overturned, for example. So for one, an argument, you know, from bad design is just bad theology. Especially if what we know to be true after the fall, you know, we'd experience death and decay. That means we would assume and expect, you know, death and decay of a once perfect design. You know what I mean? So we wouldn't expect perfect design now. And I think he used the laryngeal of the giraffe, but not everything has even been tested extensively enough to know what its true design really is. I know my rebuttal had to do with the eye as well, where Richard Dawkins himself was proven wrong on that. And even Richard Dawkins himself, when it comes to junk DNA and the death of junk DNA. He said in his book, I think it was in 2009, that it is a remarkable fact that the greater part of the genome might as well not be there for all the difference it makes. And then after Dawkins realized junk DNA was overturned and dead, he stated after ENCODE revealed its results, he said, I know there are some creationists who have jumped on it in reference to ENCODE because they think it is awkward for Darwinism. Quite the contrary, of course. It is exactly what a Darwinist would hope for, to find usefulness in a living world. So a lot of these arguments from bad design, junk DNA, useless organs, or near useless organs, they've all been overturned. So I would just say that they're arguments from ignorance and arguments from bad theology. They don't understand the Bible. They don't understand the fall. They don't understand death and decay.
Standing for truth. I think we have to go back to the order of the fossils because that was a big deal. And this is one of their top arguments, correct?
Yeah, if you wanted to give a brief explanation, because I think what we're going to do is set aside a separate video at some point and go into real detail. But if you wanted to finish addressing what you were saying there in regards to the ordering of the fossils, yeah, go ahead, man.
Yeah, and there's also the marine fossils being found on all rock layers, which is their alternative explanation why fossils are found in different in all the rock layers. So are we gonna address it now also, or maybe just briefly? I think.
Yeah, go ahead, man. You can address it briefly.
So I think the order of the fossils, I've already covered several points during the first video. So I think I'll just add a few more, and then next video I'll add a few more, until evolution dies. Okay. So let me just think of something that first come to mind. Let's say the order of the fossils. Other than what I've already shared during the first video, I'll add some more. Okay. For example, okay, the behavior of some animals, as we know, is very rigid. Correct? Is rigid the correct English? I think rigid is the correct English. So they will prefer to stay where they live often, and would have had little chance to escape the rising floodwaters. Correct. So so that said, more adaptable animals that adapt more, that can better adapt, would have recognized that something was wrong before the floodwaters, the sediments swept them, correct? And thus, they would these highly adaptable animals would make an effort to escape. Fish, for example, as we know, are the least adaptable in their behavior. That's why they were buried first. Okay, while amphibians are next. And they are followed by fish, amphibians,
Followed by reptiles.
Reptiles. Yeah, how did you know? Good. Followed by reptiles, and then birds, and then humans. It's perfectly explained by the CPT model. And there are lots more. There are lots more to explain this order of the fossils.
There are fossil footprints of animals moving upwards up a hill while being pushed sideways. So imagine you're in a you're trying to climb out of moving water, and the water is pushing on you sideways, but you're trying to climb upwards to get out of it so you don't drown. And so the water is moving you sideways, but you're climbing upward at the same time, so your tracks go up at an angle. But your feet are pointing upwards, but they're in a pattern going sideways and upward. See, there are many patterns like this, fossil footprints found in the fossil record. And what this shows is a creature that's been trapped underwater that's trying desperately to climb uphill, but he's being pushed sideways as he's climbing uphill. because his feet are pointing up the hill, but they're moving sideways as they go up. See what I mean? So the water is pushing them sideways as they're climbing up. And we found the scientists have found a number of fossils like that in the fossil record. And the best explanation for that, of course, is that a creature was buried in water that came upon them suddenly, and they're desperately trying to get to the air so they can not drown. And the water, however, is moving, so it's pushing them sideways as they're desperately trying to climb upward. Now, the evolutionists will say, well, how do you preserve the fossil footprints then? Well, because the sediments, the water was so heavily laden with sediments that it came and buried the footprints rapidly and left a fossil record. If footprints had existed for a vast age of time, erosion would have removed them. They shouldn't exist at all. They can only exist if they were buried rapidly. So that would support the young Earth creationist flood model for the existence of the fossil footprints, because if the fossil footprints were made and then they were buried and they existed and they exposed to the water and erosion and wind, and not for 100,000 years, much less 10 million years, they should absolutely completely disappear. So the only reason we have these fossil footprints is that they were made and then buried almost immediately, again, by another layer of sediments, heavily laden with minerals and dirt and chert and whatnot, that came and buried them immediately, so they were not destroyed. So you cannot explain that with the vast age of time. You can only explain it with rapid inundation.
Yeah, and correct. And as we know, amphibians also are least mobile, correct, compared to reptiles. That's why they're buried first before the reptiles. That's the pattern in the fossil record too. Standing for truth. Standing for truth.
Probably.
I was muted. Sorry, brother. Yeah, no, I totally agree with.
Anything more?
That's absolutely true.
Anything more? Yeah, sorry. The 6 mega sequence of rock layers. Nep, are you familiar with the 6 mega sequence of rock layers?
What? Who?
Nef.
Oh.
Or anybody.
I'm not too familiar. I mean, I'm a little bit familiar with it.
Sorry for asking. Never mind. Because Standing for Truth mentioned several minutes ago that marine fossils are found in every rock layer, and this is a huge problem for evolutionists because their rock layers are supposed to be proof of evolution, yet we find marine fossils in every rock layer. So this was a huge shocker before. But of course they develop a rescuing device concerning this. Okay, and their rescuing device fails terribly. Okay, because they're trying to explain why marine fossils are found in the Himalayas, everywhere, on all the rock layers. If they do not develop something to rescue this evidence against their theory, they're dead. So what they propose are that sea level, okay, has risen and fallen 6 times to bring fossils to the continents in evolutionary history. Hear that? 6 times, because there are 6 mega sequence of rock layers. Talk about a massive rescuing device. Up and down of sea levels 6 times in evolutionary history. It's hard enough for sea levels to rise and fall once. It has to do it 6 times. And it needs to deposit the whole height of the 6 mega sequence of rock layers, sedimentary rock layers, about a mile. I'm not sure how high it is really, but probably it's a mile. It's a mile maybe. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I forgot the exact number. The water will have to come up, go back, come up, go back to deposit sedimentary rock layers containing fossils. The ocean floor the ocean floor also has to rise and the ocean floor, and the continents too has to rise and fall 6 times in evolutionary history to deposit those 6 mega sequence of rock layers. Okay, it's hard for standard geology to do that because the geology is simply like this. Okay, the lighter or less dense continents, okay, float on the denser mantle beneath them, and this alone debunks their rising and falling 7 times of sea levels. That's a physical impossibility by the standard snail-paced evolutionary plate tectonics. You would need a stronger version of plate tectonics to achieve this. And only the flood model catastrophic plate tectonics can do it, as I have explained in the previous video. Okay, now actually many geologists have seen this as an obvious problem because, like I said, the lighter or less dense continents float on the denser mantle beneath them. Okay, let's use the Himalayas as an example. Yeah, Himalayas would be a very good example. The Himalayas are the highest parts of the world, correct? So you would expect the crust beneath the Himalayas to be the deepest also, because you need a root underneath the Himalayas, correct? So for the Himalayas to rise to so high, there has to be more material underneath. So this means that the denser ocean crust would sink lower to the mantle, would sink lower on the mantle than the continental crust. Okay, this is why the continents are above sea level. Okay, this is standard geology. You're a geology student, you should know this. Okay, this is why the continents are above sea level, because they rise relative to the sea level. So that all said, it's really impossible to bring the sea levels with marine life sediments to cover entire continents using the standard evolutionary plate tectonics. You would need the flood version, which I explained in the previous video, of plate tectonics to do that. Evolutionary geologists are cornered over here. So once again, they develop rescuing device, and it's called episodic catastrophism. Episodic catastrophism. This is actually much easier to refute, but we'll get to that in the next video. So is that enough?
You're absolutely right there, Jeremy. And I think it was R.J. Downard and actually Raging Atheist tried to use that one as well, that rescue device. And
which one? Episodic catastrophism?
You got it. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's their big rescue device to explain all everything we see. But even the mega sequences that you were talking about at first there, they're separated by flat eroded surfaces, and to erode a flat surface, Jeremy, across the entire continent, that means that the ocean water had to have been immensely energetic. So as these waters then, slowed down, they deposited, another mega sequence on top of the eroded surfaces, right? These unconformities, and then the process is repeated. So this is really only explained under a biblical flood-based model.
There's something incomplete with what you said, because let's episodic catastrophism is true. Let's assume their rescuing device. Let us give them a benefit of a doubt here that episodic catastrophism is true. Okay, one disaster depositing 1 mega sequence of rock layer, the first of the 6 layers. Okay, it's over there, and then because episodic, that is why it's called episodic catastrophism, because it doesn't happen continuously. It happens by episode during different geologic eras in evolutionary history. So first layer, like I said, deposited through a disaster or something. Okay, now after that layer is deposited, there millions of years happen on top of that layer. Okay, millions of years happen on top of that layer, and then another episodic catastrophe comes. Okay, and it covers the environment and the first layer. Did I say environment? Okay, that's the problem of this rescuing device. We do not find evidence of millions of years of this environment at the middle of the contact points between these rock layers.
Yeah, that's
Go
a
to
really
the
good point. That's a very good point.
Go to the Grand Canyon and see for yourself. Okay, and there are evolutionists. Actually, there's one part of the Grand Canyon which shows. It's called the Temple Butte in the Grand Canyon, and that Temple Butte shows partial evidence of erosion between one of the layers, but only one. Okay, only one of the 6 sequences, or two. Sorry, because it's in the middle of 2 layers. But when you study that Temple Butte, it's only evidence of localized erosion, not millions of years of erosion. Okay, and see, even episodic catastrophism fails. So what do they have left? Nothing. By faith. Hopefully, science can rescue us someday. So either it's episodic catastrophism, or the rising and falling of sea levels and the ocean crust and the continents 6 times in geologic history through the snail pace plate tectonics. Okay, and if they're going to use, like I said, plate tectonics to show this, well, plate tectonics, today's snail pace plate tectonics is also evidence of catastrophic plate tectonics of the past. We see slow and gradual plate tectonics today as leftover remnants of the once catastrophic plate tectonics that happened in the past. Something so fast in the past would have slowed down, and this is the prediction of creationists. It slows down to its current pace, snail pace. Oh man, I can go on forever destroying their entire geology, but
Yeah, they don't want to see the truth, because that destroys uniformitarianism. If geologic processes took place rapidly in the past, that's the explanation for the geomorphology of the Earth's crust, then their whole worldview crumbles. I wanted to ask Standing question: did you notice that during your debate with him that he seemed to be looking at the screen and reading a lot? Because it seems to me that he was doing what I've noticed that evolutionists have done in some of my debates, is he's getting information from some other evolutionists in Skype, and that's how he's responding to you. He's not actually telling you things that he's studied or knows about off the top of his head. He's reading the responses that he's given live in real time by other evolutionists that is coaching him.
Right.
In Skype.
I noticed that.
I watched that and I saw that he's constantly looking at somewhere else on his computer screen, and so he's reading the comments of other evolutionists in Skype or something. He wasn't telling you anything he knows. He was telling you what other evolutionists said. Yeah, just watch me. I'll tell you what to tell him. That's what he was doing the whole time.
Well, and the thing is, I noticed a lot of, because really atheists dominate those chats. The last hour, I received 99% of the questions, which is fine. I think it's fun. But I'll notice someone like him, someone as uninformed as him, right? He had no idea what I was talking about in regards to haplogroups, genetic entropy. He didn't understand the model. Even the evidence that I dismantled right off the bat, pseudogenes, chromosomal 2 fusion. My goal is to just go right for the jugular and go right for their very best evidence. I suspect
he was at a loss to address most of what you said.
He was at a loss. And even in his opening, I think he only took 3 minutes of the 10 minutes, because just like you said, he was at a complete loss. And sometimes in the live chat, you'll see some of the things the atheists say, and then all of a sudden he'll say that same thing word for word. He's looking at it's pretty much the audience plus the atheist versus the creationist.
But yeah, I noticed too that he was looking at the screen, like seemed like he was looking at, someone was guiding him, possibly. I noticed that too, though.
Yep, and I've seen that very behavior in many evolutionist debates that I've had. An evolutionist will, they get up the gumption and they get the muster, the courage to debate an informed creationist, but then they've got their little clique, you know, who I'll guide you. Just listen to me. Read what's on the screen, and that's what they end up doing. And I think that's not really too uncommon. But it seemed to me obvious that was what he was doing, especially in the last half of your debate with him. He's looking at the screen with his finger up against his chin, like he's his jaw. He's not thinking about things that are in his mind. He's looking at something else that some other evolutionist is telling him to say, responses that he's getting coaxed. He's getting coached constantly. So what you were actually debating, my friend, is you know, and not terribly uncommon. You were actually debating about 5 other evolutionists at the same time, and refuting all 5 of them at once. You know, with one spokesperson. You know,
well, honestly, their lack of skill in the debate arena is why, for one, Neff, you and I are having such a hard time trying to find, you know, 2 willing evolutionists to go on modern day debate and debate formally 2-on-2 structured. Right. Because the thing is, like we were talking about earlier, you look at some of your bigger named evolutionists on YouTube, the ones with some of the big channels that kind of hide behind their videos, Apologia, Tony Reed, whoever it is. And they won't come out and debate, because at the end of the day, when they debate an informed creationist, they're exposing themselves to their own audience as being ignorant, and that's exactly what would happen too.
Well, I would love to see you guys debate that Agrippa guy, because he's fine with throwing insults from a distance, but I'd like to see how he actually fares in an actual debate. That would be very interesting.
Well, most evolutionists, the ones that will debate an informed creationist like myself or Standing, are typically those who are don't have huge followings on the internet. The ones that have huge followings with tens of thousands of subscribers are typically not very interested in doing such things like Thunderfoot and Aaron Raw and a number of others, because they know that, just as you said, they're exposing themselves to being refuted in front of their own audience, and that would be embarrassing to them and cause them to lose face, as the Japanese say, to amongst their own subscribers. So they don't want to have a recording of themselves being refuted on the internet that they don't have legal authority to remove. It's going to be there. It's a permanent record of them being squashed by creationists, and so they shy from debate. The ones that debate us, that are very outspoken, like some of those that have debated us recently, are the sort of a middle class. I think I've said this for about 15 years now, 10 or 12 years. There are really 3 classes of evolutionists. There's the absolute complete novice who knows squat, nothing. And
95% of them.
Yeah, they just not interested in debating at all. They're just looking for some other evolutionist to tell them why that their reason to believe in God doesn't exist is true. That's all they are. And then there's the ones that are fairly informed. And that's a very broad category, lowly informed all the way up to fairly well informed, who will actually engage in debate because they're very adamant, they're very emotional, very dependent upon evolution theory being true, and they're determined not to have their conscience damaged, and they'll actually debate people. Then there's the ones that have huge followings on the internet, and these guys will almost never debate anybody because they don't want their reputations damaged. So what we end up dealing with usually is the guys in the middle, and that's a very broad range guys, and they're easily squashed. Of course, the upper class ones are easily squashed as well, but we get the challenge to debate met only by the ones in the middle, it seems. The ones below them, they don't know enough to even begin to debate, and the ones above, they know just enough to get smashed, but won't do it because that would hurt their multi-$1,000 subscriber list, and they don't want to do that.
Well, it actually, your assessment there was spot on. I 110% agree. And what I've noticed too, though, is some of these middle class, as you put it, Obviously your low level, your mid. A lot of your low level is like, for example, the one that Landon mentioned, this guy Agrippa. A lot of the ones that are just keyboard warriors that hang out in the chat and they suffer from the confirmation fallacy. You know what I mean? Like they'll go to the other evolutionists that they think are more informed when we use a stronger argument, and they'll get reassurance that, okay, our pet theory is still good, it still stands, they'll look for any answer. But the middle ones I find are actually more informed and better opponents than your atheists that have your larger channels, for example, Apologia.
That's right, you're exactly right.
And that's why they won't debate, because they don't want to put themselves out there. Like there's one guy who's got a pretty popular channel. I think his name's Godless Engineer or something. Real clown, real goof. I mean, we would destroy him. But yet he's really popular on YouTube. But yet, the middle class ones, like let's take someone like Jackson Wheat, for example. He's got a couple thousand subscribers. He's a lot more informed than that guy. But then that guy will never debate. Jackson Wheat would. But then someone like Jackson Wheat is lesser known. You know what I mean? So really, it comes down to the ones that won't debate you, the ones with the popular channels, they're actually probably the weakest opponents. And they don't want to expose themselves to their audience of that fact.
Standing for truth. Would you please smash their one of their favorite arguments? The majority of scientists believe in evolution.
Oh, God.
Actually, Matt, you want to take that one on, since you seem pretty triggered by it. Yeah, you seem pretty odd by that. You want to take that one on, Matt?
But before Matt speaks, let me say just a quick thing. Other than what I said before, which you guys heard, which would really discourage an evolutionist if they heard my explanation why majority of evolutionists believe in evolution. Let me add a little one here before Matt. Most of those scientists that believe in evolution don't care about the creation evolution debate. They just don't care. Okay?
Yeah.
If they care, then you can use the majority thing. Okay? So that's another one. So sorry, Matt.
Oh, it doesn't matter, man. That's good. Interject all you want. But that 99% stat that they love to throw around came from Brian Alters from 2007 petition called Project Steve in support of evolution. He only made scientists named Steve eligible to sign it. So that's kind of ridiculous. But even besides the point, so what the majority believe it? That's idiotic logic. I can turn around easily to them and say, well, guess what? The majority believe in God, so that must be true now too. What are you going to go with? So the majority means nothing to me. They believe the world is flat.
Exactly.
Sorry, go ahead.
I really like to repeat what I said before. Simple, so quick. Is evolution taught in schools? Is creation science taught in schools? No, right? Where do scientists get their education from? Schools. So since they never heard of creation science in their lives, naturally they will be evolutionists. It's as simple as that. So evolutionists cannot use the majority unless creation science is also taught in schools. As simple as that.
Well, we know evolutionists are denialists. So, Matt, tell us about your. I mean, we're all pretty informed, us here in about the scientific bias, the confirmation bias of the secular evolutionists, and their philosophical reasoning that evolution must be true based on the idea, well, evolution has to be true. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So, Matt, tell us a little about that.
Yeah, well, they can't have another option, really, because essentially, if there's no such thing as evolution, there's only creationism left. I mean, they can throw out other theories, but all the other theories incorporate evolution. So you can't have panspermia or aliens brought life here. So it's because it also incorporates evolution, because if they brought life here, that means they brought some minute bacteria that evolved into humans that we see today. So they all essentially incorporate some form of that. So it's just a pleading fallacy of popularity, basically. Oh, the majority believe it, so that must be true. But that's such a horrible argument to me.
Well, Matt, isn't it true that the science advances by overthrowing the opinion opinion of the majority in the scientific community. Isn't how new scientific discoveries are made, by overthrowing what was believed once to be true by the consensus of scientists? Isn't that how science advances?
Exactly, but you see, evolution is protected by law. It's the only science that's actually protected. So it's not going to go anywhere. Plus, the Royal Society moved it to a soft science, and those are never proven or ever falsified. So they're pretty safe. That's why their theory predicts everything. You know, they're really safe when they can never be falsified.
Exactly. It can't be false. Why? Because it's true. You know, I just uploaded a video earlier today where I showed a little snippet of me debating an evolutionist, and I pointed out the insurmountable problems of evolution relating to the protein folding, right, and the specificity of proteins and how they interact with each other as molecular mechanical components, and how evolution could, the mathematics of the improbability of that possibly ever happening by unguided stuff, right? And this evolutionist, he said to me, he said, well, his next response when I finished talking to him was, well, but it happened.
Oh, great.
And, you know, what I've always been saying for years, evolutionists say, well, it happened anyway. Despite all the science that shows it's irrational to believe that could happen, well, it happened anyway. That's why we're here. How do you know a camel evolved? Well, there it is, ain't it? I mean, isn't that the way they think, Matt?
Yeah, it's weird logic, because they can't think of an alternative, because they always say Christians don't have any predictions, because why? They don't know what the Bible actually says. It's very easily to falsify us, you know, easily. The fact that we line up and they track all mitochondrial to a single woman and a single male, like, if of course it would have been easily to falsify us if it had gone to many different things and many different species, but it doesn't. So, like, you know what I mean? If it just tears apart the Bible, our predictions are gone. But yet, every time we get to it, it lines up.
And don't they say, well, the Bible contradicts itself? Well, how do you know that? Well, this website says so. Well, so you read the Bible, but no, wait a minute, you didn't read the Bible. So you went to a website by an atheist who said this passage conflicts that one, taken grossly out of context, and he got that information from, let's see, another atheist website that said the same thing, and he got that information from another website made by another atheist. So you don't really know why the Bible contradicts itself. You know it does because, well, I've got a web link that says so. You know?
Yeah, always fun. They want to argue. They want to argue on one topic, and then as soon as you start beating them, they just transfer it over to another one. It's like, okay, well, I'll show that their Bible, like, this will be a good one. Here you go. Okay, well, so what? You just disproved evolution. That doesn't make your stupid Bible any more real. Oh, okay, that's it.
Right? Don't we hear that all the time, Matt? When evolutionists get angry that you point out real scientific data, you'll provide real scientific links to science papers and stuff, and say, look, this data shows that, and they get so triggered by that. Then what do, Matt? Don't they always run to the Bible? They'll say, but your Bible says Jesus is God, dude. I mean, don't you hear that kind of thing all the time?
Yeah, peasants wrote the Bible. That's a great one. Yeah, peasants wrote that book. Sure, they did. They couldn't even read. They somehow wrote a book that still managed to make it through all of history as the #1 book in the world, because peasants did it, right? Just ridiculous.
Well, it's written by goat herders. You know, the ancient guys that believe thunder was created by God, because they didn't understand how thunder worked. That's why they believed in God. I mean, we hear this kind of stuff all the time, don't we?
Yeah. Oh, there's no design in anything. What's the Fibonacci sequence then, or what's sacred geometry, or what's about the golden ratio? Well, that doesn't count. Oh, okay.
Yeah, just remember this, guys. I think you already know this. Evolutionists have a commitment to naturalism only. So before any scientific investigation starts, bias. They discount
automatically. Exactly.
Yeah, no God allowed. If you see design, then it must have evolved. It's not design equals a designer for them. It is not Occam's razor for them. Designed
Exactly.
to
And when it comes to the genetic information, you'll point out that, well, the DNA is actually complex, specified, overlapping, nested, highly compressed genetic information that relates to other sequences found in different locations spanning across the entire genome, interdependent sequences that span all the way across the genome. And they'll say, well, that's what evolution does. I mean, as though that's a possible explanation, you know, or as though that's reasonable. I mean, it's just a mantra for them. It's not explanatory, has no explanatory power, doesn't even address the subject, but it's what evolution does because, hey, that's what molecules can
Yeah,
do.
exactly. Look at what Aaron Raw does, for example. He goes, atheism is just a lack of belief in God. But he says, I know God doesn't exist. Really, that's a knowledge claim. That's the exact opposite of what you're supposed to say.
Exactly. And they'll say,
Yeah.
well, it's not actually genetic information. It's just the arrangement of DNA molecules that does it. But wait a minute. It isn't information that specifies what it does. And they'll say, well, the DNA arrangement of the DNA nucleotides does make it happen. That doesn't mean it's information. I mean, what? You know,
And-
what?
And how was it arranged? Ever ask them that question? How did they arrange themselves?
Well, they require no oxygen for that to happen. They require, you know what I mean? For left-handed amino acids to form, that's why they invoke that the Earth must have had no oxygen, even though they found that it actually does now, and it was water. But regardless, they have to invoke a mystical process. But abiogenesis now they've removed from the evolution theory, so now they can just say that has nothing to do with it. The beginning of evolution has nothing to do with evolution. You know,
It's not the evolution of the first cell from non-living matter. That's not true. It's not, even though university biology websites constantly describe abiogenesis as the evolution of the cell from non-living matter. They'll call it the evolution of the cell. But then when you debate an evolutionist, they'll say, that's not evolution, that's called abiogenesis. But wait a minute. Evolutionist university professors acknowledge that's even an evolutionary process. But the layperson evolutionist who wants to debate creationists will say that's not evolution. But what? Hey, Jerry Coyne, the loudmouth evolutionist university professor, acknowledges that it is. You know what he says? He says, I wish atheists would stop saying abiogenesis is not evolution because it is. That's what he says. I mean, does he know better than them?
Yes, actually, Professor Paul Davies also said that. Something like that. You know Professor Paul Davies, right?
I think I've heard you mention him before.
Yeah, he's popular actually.
Yeah. We need to find that quote you're talking about.
Yeah, I forgot where.
I'm sure we can find it. So, but
Well, I mean, if it's the evolution of a cell, isn't it the evolution of a cell from inanimate matter? Isn't that true? It is an evolutionary process. It's not a creation one, right? Duh. I mean, so
Well,
the only reason
it's like right here, Neff. I pulled up on the screen for everyone to see. All you got to do is write chemical evolution, and there it is. The formation of complex organic molecules from simpler inorganic molecules through chemical reactions in the oceans. You know, a lot of storytelling here. That's why I say they got a science fiction-based religion. But during the early history of the Earth, the first step in the development of life on this planet, the period of chemical evolution, there's that word again, lasted less than 1 billion years, all part of their science fiction religion. I mean,
and what do you think James Tour, probably the world's foremost chemist, at least in the top 5 or 10, who was in 2008, the most cited, the 10th most cited scientist on the planet, who says that it's extremely difficult to manufacture a molecular machine of the tiniest, simple, like a nano car, molecules. He says, I know how difficult it is to build a molecule. He says it's nearly impossible. We're barely able to build anything with molecules. He says, so what he says, so this idea that such complexity can arise by unguided processes is unknown to man, and there's not a plausible reason for it, and challenges any evolutionist in this world to explain evolution at the molecular level to him. And you know what? He gets almost nobody that bothers to respond to him, because he's one of the world's foremost experts in chemistry and tells you it don't happen. Molecules do not organize themselves into levels of complexity. It don't happen. So, I mean, are we to take the word of one of the top chemists in the world, or are we to believe by faith that evolution is true? What's more plausible?
There's also the oxygen problem, as you guys know. You know about that, Neff?
Oh, yes. Oxygen destroys biological molecules. Absolutely.
Yes.
It's like acid.
And
So is water, in fact. If it's not already in a cell, it's like acid.
also the chirality that we see on the molecule too. How did it happen like that, right?
Well, that's why the Miller-Urey and other experiments were conducted without the presence of water or oxygen. They replace it with methane and other gases, because they know that if they put oxygen in there, that would destroy it. So it's not going to happen in an oxygenated environment. Then, of course, because of this, you've got the evolutionist scientists that say, well, the early Earth lacked oxygen. It didn't have any, and it got it because billions upon billions of comets, for some reason, slammed into the early Earth, melted to become the oceans of the Earth, and that's where all the oxygen came from. So the Earth was once a ball of molten hot magma, bombarded for God knows what reason by bajillions of comets that brought all the water that became the oceans of the Earth. Isn't that miraculous? They became the oceans of the Earth. Can you imagine how many comets would have to stricken the early Earth to make the oceans? Which is, there's more water on the Earth than land. And this is what brought the oxygen, because evolution couldn't have taken place. Abiogenesis couldn't happen if there's water and oxygen present. That would destroy something that's supposedly forming by natural chemical interactions thousands upon thousands of times faster than it could ever form. It's like telling you, I'm going to walk up a hill by moving 10,000 steps backwards and 1 step forward, and I'm going to make it to the top of the hill that way. It's ridiculous. It can't happen. It's just not scientific.
Yet they say that we believe in magic, right? And they have the biggest magic of all from that molecular level, and the biggest magic of all also from astronomy, the multiverse. See? Now who believes in magic? Right?
Well, the
Right.
problem is too, the fact is that when the evolutionary predictions fail them, they just ignore it, or they rationalize it away, or they push it under the carpet and hope that the public forgets about these ridiculous rescuing devices that they have to use all the time when they, or, oh, we just don't know enough yet. What a joke, you know? Man up and take a defeat, really. I mean, we ourselves are a group that have easily falsified evolution ourselves multiple ways, and they just go, well, we'll figure it out later. Oh, there you go.
Right, because evolution is a philosophy. It's not science. It's a massive package of assumptions assumed to be true. It's a philosophical construct, but it's not science. This is one thing that evolutionists refuse to acknowledge because they can't see it, because there's a paradigm shift. Their confirmation bias. They cannot see that evolution is a philosophy, but it is not science. It's
and another problem is, oh, I'm sorry. Another problem is the coincidences, because they don't know the scriptural model. They don't know what the Bible actually says about anything. They don't see the coincidences and the consistencies in the Bible and what I call the odds game. They don't know. They don't realize the odds of Noah's flood being mentioned basically worldwide with all 8 survivors, or that humans are all 99.9% related, or that humans from the Fertile Crescent, or that genetic degradation or rapid decrease, and the fast mitochondrial clocks, and the fact that we're all frugivores like God created and placed us in the Garden of Eden, right? Or that the Earth was has very few meteorites ever found in old rocks. Like you were saying earlier, Neff, is that they were supposedly bombarded Earth for eons and eons until it formed the oceans. But yet they found it was actually a Garden of Eden from the very beginning. I can post links where all obligate carnivores can live off plants, just like the Bible says from the very beginning. All of them, snakes, sharks, you name it, all of them. Unbelievable.
Right. In fact, that's a very important point, because it is, in fact, this belief that the Earth was once a ball of magma that cooled over millions of years that is, in fact, the most convincing idea to the general public that evolution is true. And the reason for that is that they believe that if the millions of years are true, then the Bible and all religious texts on the earth that says God may have created the earth only, thousands of years ago cannot be true. It's obviously not true. How do we know? Well, because the earth was once a ball of magma. And logically, and it's true logically that this would be true, if that were true, it would take millions of years for the earth to cool down to the point that it would support life. So because they believe the astronomy, the cosmological explanation of the secular camp, that the claim that the earth was once a ball of magma that cooled over millions and millions and millions of years, then therefore evolution has to be true. You see, that's what it is. So in truth, one of the claims of the uniformitarianist, the evolution secular camp, that should be addressed and smashed the most is this false belief that the earth was once a ball of magma, because that belief is ingrained in the minds of millions of people, because cosmologists and astronomers have spent so many countless hours on television, like Carl Sagan and whatnot, over the last 30 years, since 1960s and 70s, claiming this was true, and the general public comes to believe it. Now, if they believe the earth was once a ball of magma that cooled over millions of years, they know, so they think, the biblical account of creation cannot be true, and therefore evolution has to be true, because evolution also takes millions of years after the earth had cooled. You see what I mean? It all rides on this false belief that the earth was once a ball of magma in space that cooled down over millions and millions of years. If you can discredit that, you can get millions of people to jump away from evolution and to consider creation.
Awesome, guys. Well, you know what? I think we presented a lot of good information here. Another good episode of the Creation Hour, which today probably should be called the Creation Hours. But let's do this again soon. Thanks so much for everybody coming on. Neff, Jeremy, Landon, Ramat. As always, it's been a great time. Any last words from you guys? And then we will call it a night.
I don't have anything really specific to say, just I enjoyed it and I look forward to the next episode.
Just remember this: evolutionists know their bias and they don't care. That is why we know we creationists are correct.
They're proud of their bias. They're proud. You're right.
I just say thanks for having me, man, and power to you for your strong apologetics. Keep doing what you do. Thanks. God bless you, man.
Awesome. Thanks so much. God bless, guys, and we will we'll talk to you later. Standing for Truth is out.